essentially it doesn't matter how hateful or extreme a tweet or what someone says is, the criminal law is not the right way to tackle that.
If they turn out to be connected with crime or terrorism, they should be swiftly removed from the country, and that's what we're not doing at the moment.
So I think what this campaign has done is that it's noted and highlighted just that kind of glaring double standard within multiculturalism, which is that all identities are to be celebrated apart from the national one.
Hello and welcome to the Spike podcast. I'm Fraser Myers, delighted to be joined as ever in the studio by Spike's editor Tom Slater.
Hello.
And we're absolutely thrilled to be joined for the first time by Ross Clark, the author of the brilliant Not Zero and Far From EU-topia. Welcome, Ross.
Hello, hi.
So loads to discuss today. We'll be talking about the release from prison of Lucy Connolly, the closure of the Epping Asylum Hotel, England's flag wars, and the folly of net zero. So Lucy Connolly, the Northampton childminder who was jailed for a tweet, jailed for 31 months or sentenced to 31 months, has been freed after 9 months. Tom, this is a bit of a cause célèbre for the right, quite understandably. It's probably the longest that anyone has been given for a single tweet. I should probably read the tweet out just so that everyone is clear what she said and what she was sentenced for. So she said, "Mass deportation now, set fire to all the hotels full of the for all I care. While you're at it, take the treacherous government and the politicians with them. I feel physically sick knowing what these families will now have to endure. If that makes me racist, so be it." And she's referring there to the Southport murders that had happened on that very day. Tom, it is an undeniably despicable thing what she said, but how could she have seen the inside of a prison cell for that?
No, absolutely. And I think we have to, on this issue, sort of walk and chew gum at the same time, and a lot of people seem to struggle with that, is what she said bioinflammatory? Absolutely. Should she have been put in prison for it? In my view, absolutely not. That's a kind of distinction we continue to stub our toe on in this country. Understandable, because we've had very censorious hate speech laws for a very long time. But I think cases like this, and given the extremity of the sentence, I think it's really hammered home that really no good comes from putting someone who said something deeply unpleasant in prison for months and months on end. As you say, she served 9 months of this sentence. She'll continue to serve out the rest of it at home under certain conditions that are not entirely clear, at least to the public right now. But I think it has generated a very necessary debate about the state of our speech laws, also about the extent to which, in the wake of Southport, what a horrific moment for the country, there was an element of an atmosphere being created from the very top of government, insisting that people, not only who are engaging in hateful violence, but actually engaging in hateful speech, would also have the book thrown at them, that there would be made examples of. People remember those government social media accounts saying, think before you post. The Attorney General, Lord Homer, who incidentally has to sign off on all of the incitement to racial hatred offences, saying that, keyboard warriors couldn't hide behind their keyboards and so on. The message really went out from the top at that point that the hate speakers would be made examples of, and no more so than Lucy Connolly. So it's one of those things where, because the state of free speech in this country has become so bad, you often find yourself arguing over cases in which what someone said was not actually that extreme. People have been visited by the police for misgenderings on the internet and so on. We've almost been playing this debate on easy mode for a while. What I think the Lucy Connolly case does is it confronts us with the fact that essentially it doesn't matter how hateful or extreme a tweet or what someone says is, the criminal law is not the right way to tackle that. And hopefully we're at the beginning of a kind of more substantive debate about how to make sure this authoritarian farce that we've been witnessing is not repeated. Yeah, Ross, I mean, we are in an authoritarian moment. It does seem as if free speech is disappearing under threat from all angles. What's your take on the sort of current moment?
Yeah. Well, I think what she wrote and what you read out there could clearly be taken as incitement to violence, even if she did not intend it that way. And I don't have a problem with her being convicted of that offence. It's not to me a free speech issue. I mean, if it's incitement, it's a bit beyond free speech. It's not to be compared with issues of misgendering and all that sort of rubbish that we get police chasing up about. Then again, it was a first-time offence, and I think the prison sentence she was given was grossly excessive. I think it's something that should have been dealt with through a community discharge, community service, rather than a custodial sentence. And but the trouble is, I mean, if you're going to set a precedent of a jail sentence of that length for that kind of thing, well, you're going to have to be consistent. And every time a hate preacher says something like that, they're going to have to end up in jail. Every time a climate protester or something makes some insightful remark, or a Palestinian protester makes some kind of incitement, they're going to have to go into jail as well. And I think what causes anger is when it seemed to be the two-tier justice. And last week we had the Labour councillor who was acquitted of this, of a very similar, making very similar sort of remarks about far right figures. Now the two cases were not directly comparable because Lucy Connolly pleaded guilty and the Labour councillor did not. Calling Labour councillor, the ex-Labour councillor, of course, he was expelled. And he went for a trial and he was acquitted. Maybe if Lucy Connolly had gone for a trial, she may have been acquitted. So it's possible she was badly advised on that. But it is absolutely essential that if whatever sentences are handed out, they are equal on all sides of political debate. And I think it was excessive in Lucy Connolly's case. I think other cases, other people have maybe been allowed to get away with making hateful and insightful remarks. So there's I think there is something in the charge of two-tier justice, even if those two cases weren't directly comparable.
Yeah, and Tom, I guess isn't that sort of the problem, or gets the nub of the problem, where essentially, of course, policing speech is inherently subjective.
Yeah.
It is an inherently sort of political decision that you're going to have to make, how seriously you take one case over another. And so surely that suggests, well, we shouldn't be in the business of policing speech at all, or the police shouldn't be in the business of it, certainly.
No, exactly. I think we have to draw very clear distinctions here, which are not clear at all in British law, to be perfectly frank. I mean, incitement to violence, as you talk about there, Ross, is, this is a crime in every civilized liberal country. Even in America, under the First Amendment, you cannot incite violence. But the test there is incredibly strong. It has to be speech which is both likely and intended to cause imminent lawless action, which, looking at some of the sort of First Amendment experts from the US who have weighed in on the Connolly case, have said that if this was in the US, this would not have met that particular standard. In the UK, and this is the charge in which Connolly was brought up on, we have this much more nebulous idea also of incitement to hatred, racial and religious, in this case racial, which is kind of in British law considered a kind of close cousin of incitement to violence. But nevertheless, because that word hatred is in there, it gets you into much more subjective territory. It gets you into the realm of thought and speech. And I just don't think we can trust the authorities, whether that's the police, the prosecutors, judges, to make that kind of determination. It's something which I don't think it doesn't matter how good the particular official or the particular legal brain is, will ultimately come down to certain subjective judgments. And I think that's one thing that we really need to kind of clear out. There is so much within our existing legal framework, and it's not just incitement to hatred that we're talking about. All manner of offences which have been quietly and not so quietly added to the statute book over recent decades have just created a kind of plethora of speech laws which are going to kind of kick into gear, particularly in a moment of high, national tension, as we saw in the wake of Southport. So it's one of those things where hopefully this is a start of a discussion about the sorts of speech laws we have, not just in terms of proportion, certainly in terms of making sure that these laws are equally applied, because there's a strong feeling out there at the moment that they're not being equally applied. But I think we need to get down to brass tacks. It doesn't matter who the person is. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter how unpleasant what it is that they're saying. That shouldn't be the difference between someone losing their liberty or not. But I do think that there's much more interest in this issue than certainly there has been in the amount of time that Spites has been writing about it. And whilst whilst that's partly because things have gotten so bad, there's also something positive in that, and that the issue is much more alive than it used to be even 10 years ago. And
before I go back to Ross, Tom, I just want to say that, or ask you about, there's one aspect of this mess, or the judicial system, and Ross has alluded to it there with talking about Ricky Jones, is that actually juries are quite likely to not convict people for things that clearly the judges and the police take very seriously for speech crimes.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. And I think that's one thing, certainly the Free Speech Union have been making this point more and more in recent months, is that whilst not in all cases, and every case is going to be different, it does seem like pleading not guilty is your best bet, because, I mean, juries have always been the last kind of backstop against tyranny, against overreach. Talking about America, I mean, when the American Revolution was kicking off and there were all kinds of people who were being pulled up on seditious libel charges and other speech crimes, juries would just refuse to convict them. Yeah. That was the way in which people were allowed to walk free. So not to say that we're in a completely comparable time, I think it's a reminder that the public is very sceptical of the idea that something that someone said in a kind of horrific moment of madness and then regretted and deleted quite clearly, even on a commonsensical level, I think people realise that a long prison sentence is not the correct answer to that. So if there is hope, it's in the jurors in these cases, at least for the moment.
And Ross, I mean, the sort of free speech crisis in Britain has got so bad that even, you have the Americans weighing in saying that, we have a human rights problem almost with this, going from, imprisonment to like this to right down to the sort of non-crime hate incident and other Orwellian tools. What's your take on that?
Well, I think there is a free speech crisis. I'm just not particularly comfortable about using Lucy Connolly as a sort of pin-up for that. I mean, I think there are better causes, better examples of where people have become, caught out by the sort of war on free speech. Such as, I mean, if you're on the right, for example, I think you should look for the sort of anti-abortion campaigners who've been sort of, hauled in, arrested for, silently praying outside abortion clinics, not even saying anything, just silently praying. And, I often ask people who will, complain about the sort of suppression of free speech when it comes to Palestine action or so on. I say, well, where were you when this law was being hammered through the Commons to make it illegal to raise a silent protest within 150 meters of an abortion clinic? Of course, they sort of somehow no, that's different. It's that's harassment of women in vulnerable positions and this sort of thing. No, it's not. It's an issue of free speech. And of course, we seem to have this sort of, division between right and left. And so many on the left who stand up for their right to speech do not sort of think it's right for right-wing people to speak on what matters to them and vice versa. And I mean, the message is, if you're going to defend the right to free speech, you have to be prepared to stand up and defend the rights of those with whom you disagree, and not just disagree of the rights of those whose views you find offensive.
Yeah.
If you're not going to do that, you're not in favour of free speech. You're just in favour of your own crowd, and that is not going to work, I'm afraid.
So let's talk about the migrant hotel in Epping, which has been closed down by a High Court injunction. Well, they've ordered the council successfully got this injunction, which has ordered the hotel to remove asylum seekers within the next couple of weeks. Tom, this follows off the back of major protests outside the hotel. Seems the council finally caved into the pressure. I mean, there's and the High Court has agreed with them, basically on some planning law, ironically.
Yeah, an unlikely twist. That's what planning laws have come to the rescue in this instance.
The human rights laws versus the planning laws, which will win. But anyway, Tom, what's your take on the broader thing?
Well, I think this is essentially the first big crack in the whole policy, certainly where the hotels are concerned, but also the mess that is the asylum system. At this point, there's a lot of questions that remain about whether or not this particular ruling is going to be quite firmly appealed by the hotel chains. It certainly has an interest in that, as well as the Home Office, who are obviously furious that their policy is being interfered with. They are in the process of trying to empty the hotels, but not necessarily making a great fist of it. There's also the question about whether or not this will have a kind of knock-on effect across the country. You're now seeing even Labour councils in places like Tamworth suggest that they're going to seek similar injunctions to close down the migrant hotels in their own midst. So whether or not it has a kind of automatic impact in and of itself remains to be seen, although it seems like it almost certainly will. But I think it's just that the momentum is so clearly in one direction now. The protests have forced the issue. People in various different communities who have been bearing the brunt of the mess that is our asylum system are just refusing to put up with it, essentially. I mean, and also it's important to say this isn't just about the hotels as well. If you think about some of the protests that have been happening in Waterlooville, they were addressed by Suella Braverman recently. That relates to a block of flats which was going to be turned over to house asylum applicants. So I think fundamentally the public have noticed now what a mess the asylum system is in. They've recognised that it's basically become, in no small part, a kind of funnel for illegal migration. And that in that context where you don't know who people are, when they haven't been vetted, when it's not clear who is fleeing, charges in other countries, who might pose a threat to the public and who might not, people are not willing to take that gamble, particularly in a place like Epping, where you had, in pretty short space of time, 2 quite serious cases of residents of the hotel being brought up on charges of sexual offences and otherwise. So it does feel like this is the first crack in the whole policy, and that the government is going to be forced to respond, and not just by moving the problem around. I think at least that would be woefully insufficient to the level of public anger and interest there is now in this issue. Yeah,
Ross, that does seem to have been the response from the government. Just displacement, move people to different places, move people from hotels to HMOs, talk about the deals we're doing with France, but not really actually getting to the core issue of people crossing the border illegally.
No, exactly. As Tom said, I mean, this is a small victory under planning law for local people, and saying the migrants are going to be removed from the hotel, but they're not going to be removed to their home countries. They're not going to be sent back to France. They're going to be sent to either another hotel, or if that proves politically difficult, they'll be sent to ordinary housing in ordinary streets. So they'll be closer to people who cause even more trouble. If you've got an empty house on your street in Epping, I would be a little bit worried at the moment that the migrants will be taken from the hotel and put on your street. So it does absolutely nothing to solve the underlying problem, which is that we've become pathetic at dealing with illegal migration. And we did have a plan. The previous government did have a plan, the Rwanda plan, which would have acted as a huge deterrent for people illegally coming to this country by basically banning them from applying for asylum in Britain. Keir Starmer did away with that in one of his first acts and saw it as a great victory for human rights. Well, the consequences of that are now there for all to see. The sort of rise in yet another rise in illegal migration, and he really has no answer to. I mean, he talks about tackling the smuggling gangs, people smuggling gangs, but he's sort of treating it as if every illegal migrant who comes to Britain is somehow some victim of some evil gang who's sort of coshed over the head and brought here without their consent. Well, of course, what's really happening is all the migrants are willing participants in this illegal trade. They know what they're doing. They're making the calculation that the risk is worth taking for the reward. And you can't deal with this just by tackling the gangs who are probably not going to be in Britain anyway. You've got to tackle the illegal migrants themselves. And if they don't have a story that stands up, or if they turn out to be connected with crime or terrorism, they should be swiftly removed from the country. And that's what we're not doing at the moment, and it's not going to happen as a result of this small victory.
And Ross, do you see the barrier to doing that as mainly the sort of human rights framework, the ECHR, things like that? Do you think that's one of the issues that has to be tackled?
Yes, I don't think it will be properly addressed until the ECHR is either reformed or we withdraw from it. Now, other countries, or just look around, other countries are very annoyed with the ECHR as well. They're trying to, I think, first of all, we should get together with the likes of Denmark, Netherlands, and so on, who are very angered by the way the ECHR is working on this front, and try and reform it. I mean, it seems to be the place to start. If we can't reform it, then we leave. I don't think leaving the ECHR would probably be my first move if I were in government. I would try to get together with the other countries first. If we do withdraw, there's a lot of opponents who will try and make out you're declaring war on human rights, you're taking away everyone's human rights. But everybody I know wants to withdraw from the ECHR, wants instead a British Bill of Rights, which is, respects human rights, but does it in a sort of measured way and without all these sort of protocols which have been added on to the ECHR over the years. And the biggest problem with it is this thing called living instrument doctrine, which is a euphemism for judges making up the law as they go along. Until the 1970s, Britain had very, very few judgments. I don't think it had a single judgment against it, actually, for the first of 20 years of the existence of the ECHR. And then, as time went by, this living instrument doctrine sort of came into effect, and judges started interpreting it, those sort of, the convention in very different ways. And that's when we started to see cases of Britain being defeated in this court. And we've got to sort of get back to the sort of fundamentals of the European Convention as it was signed in 1950, because the authors of that would be absolutely horrified to see how it is being used nowadays to keep criminals and terrorists from being deported to their home countries. And it's an outrage, and it would have been recognised as an outrage by those who signed the ECHR sort of, 70 years ago.
We've started seeing English and Union flags crop up in towns across the country. Thousands of flags have been raised. Many of them also very quickly taken down. This is Britain after all. The British flag is seen as offensive and racist and something to be ashamed of.
Very British quirk.
Yeah.
Apparently.
But Tom, what's your take on this sort of intriguing phenomenon? Even right here outside our office, we've got a street lined with Union and St George's flags.
No, they seem to have been playing kind of cat and mouse around here in Tower Hamlets with the council workers who keep ripping them down. So this is Operation Raise the Colours. It's one of these kind of social media campaigns which has bubbled up pretty much out of nowhere and really taken the country by storm. It seems to have started in Birmingham, where particularly around the time there was a lot of controversy around the Library of Birmingham being lit up in green and white for Pakistan's Independence Day celebrations. That you saw people kind of hanging up, the Cross of St George and Union flags in their own localities, and then them being quite hastily taken down. And then the hypocrisy of that being pretty quickly exposed by the fact that around the same time it was revealed that Birmingham Council, in a leaked memo, expressed huge concern when they were trying to take down all the Palestinian flags which had cropped up in the wake of October the 7th. They actually demanded that their council workers be provided with more security. So that the kind of speed with which one set of flags is taken down in contrast to the other. Similar story in Tower Hamlets. There was this huge row over recent years from the mayor of Tower Hamlets, Lutfur Rahman, and his Aspire party, which is a sort of pro-Gaza, sort of overwhelmingly Bangladeshi party, quite willing to pay kind of pork barrel identity politics, got locked in this long dispute because they had left up all of these Palestine flags which had been put up on lampposts, council property and so on. Eventually were forced to take them down because of a legal report and the threat of legal action. In this case, it was also planning laws which came to the rescue. They were told that this wasn't acceptable. But as soon as this Operation Raise the Colours campaign hits Tower Hamlets, those flags were taken down in very short order. And the mayor of Tower Hamlets was not forthcoming in his fulsome support for those people who were expressing themselves by putting these flags on lampposts. So I think what this campaign has done is that it's noted and highlighted just that kind of glaring double standard within multiculturalism, which is that all identities are to be celebrated apart from the national ones, apart from the ones that all symbols are supposedly be celebrated, apart from the ones that we're all supposed to share. which is a curious paradox when you think about it. And I think really gets to the heart of the big problem with multiculturalism is that it poses as something which is supposed to be unifying, but it's actually very divisive, because the very things that could potentially bring us together or could be seen as a kind of shared symbol are, if anything, painted as sinister and sort of far right, which seems to be the knee-jerk reaction whenever these things happen.
Ross, your thoughts?
Yeah, I can't think of a single other country on earth which would be actually ashamed of its own flag. I mean, go to other countries, see flags flying and people's houses, people's gardens, and it's all very fine. All, just national pride, what's wrong with that? Here it's sort of treated a national flag some sort of sinister emblem for the far right rather than being everybody's symbol. And of course, it is everybody's flag. And the more you sort of seek to ban it from people's houses and people's streets, then the more you turn it into a symbol of the far right, because it then becomes a symbol of resistance, which it shouldn't be. I mean, technically, councils are perfectly within their rights to remove anything that's hung from lampposts. They're council property, and we probably wouldn't want advertising flags hung from lampposts, so we expect those to be swiftly removed. But yeah, I mean, if you've tolerated Palestinian flags for any time, you've got to tolerate a St. George's flag. Otherwise, you are, falling into that two-tier trap again of being seen to favour one group of the population over another. Definitely.
So, Ross, your book Not Zero was published 2 years ago now in 2023. It feels like a lot has changed in those intervening years. I mean, you were mounting a very important rallying cry against this lunatic policy, but it feels as if a lot more people are coming around. There's a lot more skepticism. We, of course, have a skeptic in the White House in the form of Donald Trump. Maybe things are a bit bleaker in the UK with Ed Milliband being a full-on zealot. But what's your reading on the current temperature? Where do you think we are with greenism and net zero?
Yeah, well, the thing has changed. Attitudes have changed enormously. I mean, when I started writing that book, I started looking for a publisher, and it's sort of treated as if it was some sort of way out opinion which could not possibly be shared by any decent human being. It was sort of, net zero was accepted. It was the consensus, and any right-thinking person would, of course, agree with it, even though the government then had no plan as how it was going to eliminate carbon emissions by 2050 without destroying the economy. It still has no plan. But what's changed is that the implications of this net zero target are becoming more clear by the day. And, we're seeing industries close. Jim Ratcliffe, warning that the chemical industry is doomed. We've had another steelworks close this week. And that was the goody-goody steelworks, the one that's got electric arc furnace, the one that's supposed to be making the green steel, but it's still been undermined by extremely high energy prices in this country, which can in themselves be traced back to net zero rules. People are now seeing, now we've got sort of electric cars, we're getting close to the date where petrol and diesel cars are being banned. People are realizing the implications of being forced to buy electric. We're realizing the sheer cost of heat pumps and how, they're not always effective replacement for gas and oil boilers. And the closer the implications come to people's homes and people's lives, then the less support net zero is going to have. And for years, governments have been relying on these sort of polls where people have just asked simply, do you agree with net zero? And people tend to say yes, because it sounds a sort of generally good thing. But then when you present people with the real implications, do you want to give up your foreign holidays for net zero? Do you want to give up your petrol diesel car? Do you want to, go without electricity when the wind's not blowing? people give very, very different answers. And I don't think that Ed Miliband, the government, has cottoned on to how sharply those opinions, public opinion, changes when the consequences of net zero start to hit home.
And Ed Miliband still maintains that actually, perhaps maybe he'd say in the longer term, but that actually, you know, electricity will get cheaper, life will get better. I mean, we all know that's that to be absurd, but do you think the penny will ever drop for a zealot like himself?
Well, I mean, he has made this promise, didn't he? It wasn't quite in the manifesto, but it was a promise made during the election campaign that he was going to reduce our electricity bills by £300 a year. If we're not all paying £300 less in our electricity bills by the end of this parliament, I mean, we're going to hold him to that, aren't we? Of course we are. So, and what plan he has to get there, I have to say, have no idea, because at the moment we have the highest electricity and gas prices in the world, and that can be traced directly to net zero policy. He said, it's because, Ed Miliband always says, it's because we're reliant on gas. And then you point to the US, you say, look, the US has a higher proportion of its electricity generated by gas than we do in Britain, so why are its electricity prices about sort of 1/4 of what they are here? And of course, it's just total nonsense. So what Milliband is saying, I mean, the reason gas power is so expensive in this country is the way we're using it, because we're using gas as a short-term backup when the wind's not blowing, the sun's not shining. And of course, it is very much more expensive to use a gas plant per megawatt hour. It's very much more expensive to use a gas plant for a short burst of power than it is to use it continuously, because the plant still has to be paid for, it still has to be maintained. You have to start it up from cold if you're going to use it for a short burst of power. And then we have this absurd marginal cost pricing model for our electricity market, which basically means that at any half-hour period, we all have to pay through the nose for what's the most expensive form of energy at that time. It all adds up to this cocktail giving us most expensive energy prices in the world, and that's sooner or later that is going to dawn on Ed Miliband. Why, given we seem to embrace wind and solar power more than any other country in Europe, why are our electricity prices so high?
I was just wondering, Ross, is one cause for optimism the fact that the politics around this has really changed? Because obviously we have reform in the ascendancy, in the opinion polls at least. They've been pretty kind of green sceptical for a long time. Certainly it's in Farage's previous party iterations. But even the Conservative Party, which is worth saying, signed the net zero target into law. Even up until about 5 minutes ago, was saying net zero is great, we just have to do it slightly slower, essentially, was the line that was coming out. But even now, you're hearing much more sceptical noises from Kemi Badenoch's Tory party. Regardless of, they might still be a bit of a non-factor in the next election, but is the kind of the political debate around this really changing now that the centre-right has understood that this is an issue that could actually put them on the side of voters, given how much it's been shredding our living standards, these targets?
Yeah, the consensus has gone, and we've got two of the biggest parties now, counting for, about 45% of the vote in opinion polls now, which are opposing net zero, and that has very much changed the political debate. It's next election there will be a genuine choice. Voters will be able to say we want to carry on with this, project to reduce our carbon emissions to zero, whatever cost it costs us. And then on the other side, well, no, we're not going to destroy our economy and make life unaffordable for millions of people by committing to this open-ended target. So I think we will have a genuine choice in the next election, and it will be very interesting to see how the debate changes between now and then.
Thank you so much for watching the Spiked podcast. We'll be back at the same time next week. In the meantime, why not subscribe to Spike's YouTube channel and then click the bell so you're always alerted whenever there's some new content. Spiked is producing more videos than ever, from podcasts like this one to interviews to our series of polemics. You really, really don't want to miss out on it. Plus, to get your daily dose of Spiked, just go to spiked-online.com. That's our website at spiked-online.com.